All right, so you're with us again for another deep dive, and this time we're going deep into some historical records and narratives that really expose something. It's about human nature, you know,
Yeah.
especially how people act under pressure when things get tough. We're talking about deception, fraud, the whole nine
Yeah,
yards.
we're not just going to summarize events, We're going to pull out the most interesting bits from all sorts of sources, court records, newspaper articles, personal stories, to try to understand why people did what they did, how they pulled it off, and what happened afterward. The ripple effect.
What makes this stuff so fascinating, and I think you'll agree with me here, is that it's like watching these elaborate schemes and crazy behaviors play out in real life.
Definitely. And I think you'll get a kick out of some of the twists and turns.
Yeah.
We're going to be your guides, basically, pointing out what's really important and what might just, change how you think about trust and betrayal.
So to kick things off, let's talk about James Parker and Mabel Parker. This whole thing started with, like, the simplest thing. A clothing order written on the back of an envelope.
Oh, yeah, I remember this one.
No high-tech stuff here, just a handwritten note to Rogers, Pete & Co. for a suit, pants, a sack coat, all addressed to some G.O.B. Lang on West 26th Street. Even said to put the change in the coat pocket.
It's crazy how such a small thing can unravel such a huge scheme.
Right. It's like, that's what you got to look out for, those little details.
For sure.
So the kid who delivered the order, he gets picked up, and surprise, surprise, there's no G.O.B. Lang at that address. Instead, it leads them to a James Parker at a completely different spot on West 38th Street.
And this James Parker, oh boy, he had a history.
A history of bouncing checks, that's for sure. We're talking a $160 check on the Lincoln National Bank in July, another for $290 just 10 days later, then a $510 seven-fist one on August 4th, all at the same bank.
Old move.
But here's the real head-scratcher, and this is something to think about. August 8th, he cashes a $440.15 check on the National Shoe and Leather Bank. And get this, to bearer at the same bank it was drawn on.
Wow. You really got to wonder how the heck that even happened, right? Like, what were their security measures back then?
Exactly. It makes you think about those weaknesses, those loopholes that exist even in, like, official places.
Yeah.
Someone always finds a way, right?
Always.
So enter Detective Peabody. He decides to go undercover. And, man, he really went all out.
Oh, yeah.
Ditched the razor, put on his shabbiest clothes, the whole bit. He heads over to Parker's place, not even knowing he's about to meet Parker's wife, Mabel.
She was in on it, too.
Oh, yeah, she was a piece of work. So Peabody finds her at home and cooks up this story about being Jim's old cellmate, saying Parker's desperate for morphine. Apparently, the drug problem was no secret.
Sneaky. He used what he knew about Parker against him. I mean, against his wife.
Exactly. Classic undercover move, Find that weak spot, exploit it, and it worked. Oh, yeah. He convinced Mabel he managed to slip Parker a syringe in jail, and her whole mood changed. She invites him to breakfast. Up until this point, Peabody hadn't gotten much out of her.
Breakfast is where it all went down. Classic.
Right. So over coffee and eggs, Mabel asks about Peabody's graft. Like, what's his hustle?
So she's figuring out how she can use him.
Exactly. And Peabody, he plays it cool, acts like a real seasoned crook. This seems to, boost his credibility with her.
Makes sense. In the criminal world, skill is respected, even if it's for the wrong reasons. She probably saw him as, a kindred spirit.
Totally. Then comes the big reveal. She asks Peabody if he knows why Jim got busted, and when he says phony paper, bam, she admits she's the one who wrote those bad checks, not Jim.
What? No way.
Yeah, she's pretty nonchalant about it. Then she even proposes a partnership, saying they can make a killing and get Jim out of jail. Peabody gets a cut, of course.
Wow. She's not shy at all.
No kidding. He pretends to hesitate, I never met a woman good at that, and she jumps right in, all confident, saying she can copy anything in a flash.
She's like a criminal prodigy or something.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And then she tells him everything. How she uses a wire and wax to steal mail, how she uses the stolen checks to get blank checkbooks by pretending to be the account holder.
Smart, in a twisted way.
Right. She figured if she could trick the bank into giving her a checkbook with a fake signature, they'd probably honor checks with the same signature. Brazen, right. She bragged about writing hundreds of checks that banks actually certified.
She's making a good living off of it, too.
Over $100 a day, on average.
Not bad for the time.
No kidding. And her way of, verifying herself was just as bold. She'd just flash letters and envelopes. It's wild how she managed to exploit these flaws in the mail system of the banks.
Yeah, you'd think they would have had better security back then.
Right. So she had this thing she called a letterhead frill. If she snagged a billhead or letterhead with a sample check, she'd have it copied and use it for her scams. She even mentioned this dentist, Bud, some guy on West 22nd Street.
Specifics. Always gotta love the specifics.
Really gives you a sense of, like, how organized she was. This wasn't just random. She had a whole system.
It's scary how methodical some criminals can be.
I know, right? And then, to prove her point, she does a little demonstration for Peabody, right there on the spot.
Oh, no.
She whips out a fake signature that she claims fooled the Lincoln National Bank, some Miss Kauser, and then another one, a really stiff E. Bierstadt, which she says got poor Jim in trouble. Peabody plays along, asks her to copy his fake name, William Hickey, and she nails it. Well, almost. She spells William with one L both times.
Even the pros make mistakes.
Right. You're never perfect, even when you're good at being bad. The good news is that pad she was writing on. It's now a goldmine of evidence. Peabody pretends to tear off the page, but switches it with a blank one, slipping the real one in his pocket. Smooth, right?
He's a good detective.
He is. Then he agrees to go into business with her. Mabel's ecstatic, thinking she can finally get Jim out of jail, but their little party gets crashed when Detective Sergeant Clark busts Peabody on Broadway. Staged, of course.
Nice.
So now they've got both of them. The case goes to trial, and the handwriting experts, they're the stars of the show.
Of course, gotta have the experts.
Right. They say those fake Bierstadt and Kauser signatures were practically flawless. Mabel, she was a free hand forger, meaning she didn't trace.
Much harder to detect.
Right. She could mimic the natural flow and pressure of someone's writing, making the fakes look super real, totally different from tracing, where the signatures might look the same, but they're stiff, lifeless.
Makes sense. Freehand takes real talent. It's like art, in a twisted way.
Exactly. But here's the shocker. The jury. They're not buying it.
You're kidding with all that evidence?
I know, right? They're hesitant to believe a cop over a young woman, even with her confession. Mabel's lawyer even suggests an insanity plea.
Oh, come on.
But Mabel's behavior in court, it's a whole other story.
What does she do?
She's making eyes at the jury, drawing caricatures of people in the courtroom, even writing for the newspapers. It's like she's trying to turn the whole thing into a circus.
Trying to make a mockery of the justice system.
Pretty much. The assistant DA, he's furious, especially when a drawing of him, the judge, and a witness ends up in the paper. But the court, they do nothing.
Seriously.
Seriously. When Peabody testifies, everyone's laughing, making him look like he's exaggerating.
Oh.
The first trial ends up with a big question mark over Peabody's credibility.
Mistrial. All thanks to her antics.
Yep. It shows you how unpredictable juries can be.
Yeah.
Even if a defendant's acting out, it can totally sway things.
They let their emotions get the better of them.
But the DA's not giving up. He focuses on the holes in Mabel's story.
Good. Don't let her get away with it.
Right. So she says she doesn't know anything about that envelope with Mr. G.O.B. Lang on it.
Right.
She also denies seeing any Kauser practice sheets, but she admits to writing, "I am upstairs in the bathroom," on a similar sheet, claiming the back was empty.
That's suspicious.
It is. And the handwriting experts, they nail it. They prove the same person who wrote that bathroom note also wrote the rest of the practice sheet. Plus, the Mr. G.O.B. Lang handwriting, they match it to a Mrs. James D. Singley letter.
Busted.
Totally.
Yeah.
Even though the jury was tough to convince, the evidence piled up.
It's a good lesson for our listeners, right? Even when someone's a smooth talker, good investigation and science can reveal the truth.
Absolutely. All right, let's switch gears now. I want to dive into this almost unbelievable story. General Pedro Suarez de Moreno and the LaPierres. It's all about a supposed huge inheritance and a general with, well, a pretty wild imagination.
This one sounds like a movie.
It does, right? Picture this. Madame Valois Redon and M. Emile Lapierre arrive in New York all the way from France, chasing this alleged Tessier inheritance.
Oh.
Madame Redon, she's a friend of Madame Lapierre, and she's footing the bill because, supposedly, the Tessier family blew all their cash pursuing this massive fortune.
How much are we talking?
Hold on to your hats.
$500
million.
You're kidding.
70 years after some Jean Tessier kicks the bucket, this fortune just pops up. And the general's the one who spilled the beans 3 years earlier.
That's an insane amount of money. Even today, that's huge.
Huge, exactly. It's easy to see why the Lapierres were hooked.
Total bait.
Right. And they had this, super romanticized view of America. Rivers of gold, friendly natives, lost Aztec temples, plantations, the whole 9 yards.
So he played right into their fantasies?
Oh, absolutely. He knew exactly what to say.
Yeah.
It's like a reminder for all of us. Be careful about those preconceived notions, those things we think we know. They can really blind you to the truth,
For sure. Don't believe everything you hear.
especially when it sounds too good to be true.
Especially then.
Now get this, the general, he starts spinning these yarns about meeting Marie Louise, supposedly the daughter of one of the bad guys of L'Espinasse, in Tunis.
In Tunis.
Yeah, living in this, like, extravagant palace.
Of course.
Right. Total fiction. But it gets better. He claims, he casually mentions to her that he knows about the L'Espinasse family's scheme.
During a casual stroll in the garden, no less.
Naturally. So she's furious at first. Then she does a complete 180 and offers to give back the whole inheritance.
Or at least 100 million, right?
Right. Just a measly 100 million.
Yeah.
So the general leaves, thinking everything's settled, only to realize he's been played, and now there are spies tailing him, hired by the L'Espinasses, of course.
This is getting ridiculous.
Right. It's like, come on, how could anyone believe this? But the Lapierres, they're still on the hook.
They really wanted to believe him.
They did. Even afterward, Lapierre admitted that the general was a convincing guy.
Goes to show you, a good liar can fool almost anyone.
Especially when you want to believe what they're saying.
Yeah.
And then there were the letters.
Oh, yeah, the letters.
Madame read on. She described how these letters just blew everyone's minds back in France, talking about steel elevators and houses that take up a whole city block.
Sounds pretty outlandish to an American.
Totally. But to the French, it was like, wow, America. They were eating it up.
It's fascinating how different cultures have different perceptions.
It is. And the general, he keeps piling it on. He writes about fighting the L'Espinasses, all while dealing with a broken leg and a bunch of other ailments.
The poor, persecuted hero.
Right. He's traveling all over New Orleans, Florida, Coney Island, always dodging these so-called spies.
Oh, very convenient.
Right. Classic guilt trip, designed to keep that money flowing. And then there's the coincidence of the L'Espinasses disappearing as soon as he gets to New York.
Right. What a coincidence.
Oh, and he also claims to have Tessier's whole life story, plus this mystery companion who's supposed to share the fortune, all while telling the Lapierres to stay away from New York.
Sounds more like he didn't want them poking around, seeing through his lies.
Probably. The whole thing's just riddled with red flags.
You gotta admire the creativity, though.
Oh, yeah, he was a master storyteller.
Yeah.
But then there's the list of properties.
The supposed inheritance.
Yeah, it's just ridiculous. He's throwing out these crazy values for famous places like the Hotel Savoy and the Hotel Netherland.
Like he owned the whole city.
Right. And then there are these imaginary coal mines, oil wells, silver mines.
He was painting a picture of wealth beyond imagination.
Absolutely. And he keeps playing the victim, always complaining about being surrounded by enemies, having to move constantly.
Which, of course, costs money.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He even throws in these little details, like laundry costs, 25 cents per shirt,
Making it seem real, relatable.
Exactly. And then, oh, wouldn't you know it, he just happens to forget this photo album with pictures of all these properties.
Oh, please.
I know, right? But the Lapierres, to their credit, they're starting to get suspicious. They're not sending money as easily as they used to.
Can't blame them. It's one thing to be hopeful, but another to be foolish.
Exactly. Even the promise of millions couldn't completely drown out their doubts.
Doubts they should have listened to sooner.
You're telling me.
So what happened? Did they confront him?
Well, Lapierre, he writes this coded letter to Moreno, warning him that their mail might be intercepted. It's clear they're worried about something fishy going on.
Things are heating up.
They are. And then out of nowhere, this Mr. Francis Delas appears. He offers Madame Lapierre a cool $25 million for her share, claiming he's representing other heirs.
$25 million. That's a lot of money, even if it's a fraction of the supposed fortune.
Right. But Lapierre, he's still buying into the general story. He rejects the offer, all indignant, like he's been insulted.
Wow. Talk about sticking to a sinking ship.
I know, right? It shows how deeply they were convinced. But the gig was up.
What happened?
The general, he ends up in court.
Finally.
Yeah. He shows up with all these fancy titles, admits he told the Lapierres about the fortune, but insists he really believed it was real.
Delusional.
Totally. And then the truth comes out. Literally. They open his trunk.
Oh.
No proof of nobility, no document showing his vast wealth.
Just the usual, I bet.
You got it. Thousands of train tickets, supposedly from his war days, but with the wrong dates printed in the wrong language.
Classic.
And then there were blank orders of nobility, army commissions, even a fake royal seal. The whole thing falls apart.
What a letdown.
Right. It makes you wonder, how could he keep up that act for so long?
And how could they be so gullible?
Exactly. It's a reminder for all of us, be careful who you trust. Okay, let's move on. This next one's a little different. It's about wiretapping and financial schemes.
Ooh, getting into the shady world of finance.
We are. It's called the wiretapping scheme and the Franklin Syndicate. This one's about a clever but very illegal plan to exploit Western Union.
Western Union, like the telegram company.
The very same. You see, they just restarted their horse racing news service, sending live results to pool rooms.
I see where this is going.
Right. So there's this Mr. Felix, and he gets approached by a Mr. Nelson with a proposition. Nelson claims he works at a Western Union branch office, and he's got a buddy named McPherson in charge. Their plan is to delay the race results just long enough for Felix to place a bet on the winner before the pool rooms know.
Guaranteed money, they probably told him.
Something like that. But Felix, even though he's tempted, he's not stupid. He's wondering why they picked him, a gambler known for losing, for such a sweet deal.
Smart guy.
He is. And of course he asks the obvious question, if it's so foolproof, why aren't they rolling in dough already?
Right, why come to him?
Exactly. Nelson's explanation. They got robbed after trusting someone else with their winnings. Not very convincing.
Shut it all.
But hey, easy money's hard to resist. So Felix decides to check out this so-called bustling branch office.
Was it legit?
On the surface, yeah, it looked busy enough. But Felix is still not totally convinced. He asks McPherson for some proof he actually works for Western Union. Right. And McPherson, he claims his badge is locked up in a bank vault. Ironically, that kind of makes Felix feel better.
Oh, so...
It's like, okay, this guy's taking security seriously, right? But of course, it's all a lie. It shows you how easily we can be tricked, especially when we're looking for reasons to trust someone.
Especially when there's money involved.
Exactly. So they move forward with the plan. Felix withdraws a whopping $50,000 to bankroll the operation.
$50,000, that's a lot of dough.
It is, especially back then. The next day, he meets Nelson at the Fifth Avenue Hotel, and they go to the stockbroker's office, Wasserman Brothers, which is doubling as a pool room for their scheme.
So they're all set?
Totally. The place is packed with these guys. Nelson calls boosters, and there's a trusted cashier. It's a whole production.
They really went all out.
They did.
Yeah.
Now comes the con. The announcer, he calls out one horse as the winner. Felix is ecstatic, thinking he's won a fortune.
The adrenaline must be pumping.
Oh, yeah. But then the announcer corrects himself, names a different horse as the actual winner.
Wait, what?
Yep. Felix realizes he's been played, lost all his money.
That's brutal.
It is. And just like that, poof, the millionaires vanish,
Of course they did.
leaving Felix high and dry, 50 grand poorer. But the wiretappers, they got away with a nice chunk of change. McPherson, he later confessed to Inspector O'Brien that they trimmed Felix.
So I'm good?
They did. Most of the stolen money ended up with this accomplice, a guy named Wyatt. But here's where the legal stuff gets interesting. Oh. When they finally nab McPherson and his buddy, their lawyers argue for dismissal.
On what grounds?
They cite this legal precedent. If someone willingly hands over money for an illegal purpose, they can't claim they're a victim of theft, even if they were tricked.
Interesting.
Right. Their point was Felix was trying to cheat the pool room, too, by using inside information.
Fair point.
Right. Plus, their scheme involved that whole misdemeanor of messing with telegraph messages.
So they're saying Felix was just as guilty.
Exactly. He was a thief with unclean hands, so the court shouldn't help him get his money back.
Wow. That's a tough break for Felix.
It is. It shows you how the law can have these weird loopholes and how your own intentions can come back to bite you.
Definitely something to think about. Okay, so what's next on our list of shady dealings?
Well, this section also talks about another infamous scheme, the Franklin Syndicate.
Oh, yeah, this one was big.
It was the ringleader. 520%. A Miller, as he liked to call himself.
520%? What does that even mean?
That was his big promise. 520% annual return on your investment.
That's impossible.
Exactly. It was a classic Ponzi scheme. People were lining up to throw money at him, all hoping to get rich quick.
Yeah, did they?
For a while, some did. The early investors, they got paid big interest using money from new investors.
The classic pyramid scheme.
Exactly. And these payments, they were sent out as stamped checks signed William F. Miller.
Making it seem legit.
Exactly. But of course, it couldn't last. The money was pouring in faster than they could handle.
Sounds like a logistical nightmare.
It was. Miller, he had to rent out a whole house, hire like 50 clerks, take deposits anywhere he could. Fridays, the day they paid out the interest, it was chaos. People were breaking down the stoop just to get in.
Wow. So it was a madhouse.
The total madhouse. He had to set a minimum deposit just to manage the crowds.
So it's getting out of control.
Big time. To keep things going, he partnered up with this guy, Edward Schlesinger, and they opened another office in Charlestown, Massachusetts. But Schlesinger, he was demanding, wanted his share of the profits in cash every single day.
Greedy, even for a crook.
You said it. This meant they had to keep detailed records, which, not ideal when you're running a scam. But things were starting to unravel. There were bad articles in the press, detectives were sniffing around, and then Schlesinger, he takes off with a bunch of cash.
So it's all falling apart?
Fast. Miller sees the writing on the wall. He tries to skip town with $30,500, heading to his associate Ammon's office.
Ammon?
Yeah, this guy Ammon. He was like Miller's right-hand man. But when Miller gets there, Schlesinger's already there.
Uh-oh.
Right. Ammon, he tells Miller to run to Canada, promises to take care of the money. Of course, he's got his own plans.
I bet he does.
He takes everything Miller left behind. The cash, a $100,000 certificate of deposit, a $10,000 check, bonds, the whole shebang, over $250,000.
Nice little bonus for himself.
Right. He even starts dealing with Mrs. Miller, trying to solidify his control.
Smart, but ruthless.
Totally. Ammon then tells Miller to grab Friday's receipts before making a run for it. Miller tries, gets to Ammon's office, only to find out he's been indicted.
Busted.
Yep. But Ammon's still calling the shots. He arranges for Miller to escape to Canada, promises to send his family later.
He's keeping Miller on a leash.
Exactly. Once Miller's in Canada, Ammon keeps him hanging on waiting orders, preventing him from coming back to face the music.
Smart move. Keep your accomplice out of the country and you're safe.
Right. And even when Ammon himself gets jailed on other charges, he keeps controlling Miller, even increases his allowance a bit to keep him quiet.
He's like a puppet master.
Totally. The DA, he wants to go after Ammon, but it's tough. He needs to prove that the money Miller stole is the same money Ammon got.
That's got to be hard to trace.
It is. And with Miller staying silent in Canada, it's almost impossible to connect the dots. It shows you how tricky it can be to prosecute financial crimes, especially when the mastermind is working from the shadows.
It's like a shell game, moving money around, hiding the trail.
Exactly. Okay, let's move on to something a little more personal, but still very relevant. The idea of moral overstrain and financial temptation.
This sounds interesting.
It is. It's about those stories we hear all the time. People who seem totally honest, but then crack under pressure and do something dishonest.
It happens more often than you think.
Right. It reminds us that even people with strong morals can be tempted, especially when it comes to money. And it also highlights the problems within the financial world that contribute to this. Things like not enough oversight, easy access to tons of cash, and even bosses encouraging risky investments.
Creating a perfect storm for bad decisions.
Exactly. The source even talks about this awful practice where companies would unload their bad stocks onto their employees.
Putting their own workers at risk.
Yeah, it's messed up. Creates this pressure, this feeling of being used, which can lead people to justify doing unethical things.
It's like they're setting them up to fail.
They are. And then there's the hypocrisy, especially on Wall Street. These big firms, they turn a blind eye to their clerks, gambling with company money, but only as long as they're winning.
As soon as they start losing, it's a problem.
Right. Suddenly the behavior that was okay before becomes a big no-no. It's all about protecting their own interests.
Makes sense in a twisted way.
It does. So to illustrate this point, there's this anonymous case of a young loan clerk. They call him John. He ends up stealing a lot of money and pleads guilty. They don't reveal his real name to focus on the moral of the story.
I see. So what happened to John?
Well, it starts with him being pressured by this big shot magnate to buy bank stock he can't afford.
Typical.
Right. They arrange a loan for him using the stock as collateral.
What could go wrong?
Exactly. And of course, the stock tanks immediately.
Poor guy.
Yeah, he's stuck paying interest on a loan for worthless stock. And guess what? He bought that stock from the same magnate who pressured him in the first place. It's like he was deliberately set up.
That's awful.
It is. And he later finds out other employees got caught in the same trap. It's no wonder he started feeling cynical about the whole financial system.
Totally understandable.
Right. And then he keeps running into these guys who act all successful and offer him surefire investment tips.
Oh no, that's never a good sign.
It's not. It just further blurred the lines between legitimate investing and risky gambling.
Making it easier to justify bad decisions.
Exactly. And then this guy Prescott comes along with a can't-miss tip on cotton. At the same time, John's company's going through a merger, and he might lose his job.
So the pressure's on.
Big time. And then he sees all those securities just sitting there in the loan cage. It's like the temptation was just too much.
He finally cracked.
He did. He starts by taking just 2 bonds.
Baby steps.
Right. Trying to convince himself it's temporary, that he deserves it somehow.
The classic justifications.
Exactly. And Prescott, he keeps encouraging him to take bigger risks.
Leading him down the wrong path.
Totally. Well, the cotton market does what cotton markets do.
Mm-hmm.
It slumps. Prescott's losing money, and he demands more margin from